Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. When we hear the phrase global institutions, we usually imagine neutrality. We imagine organizations created for all humanity, institutions that protect peace, reduce poverty, and give every country a voice. The United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization. On paper, these institutions belong to the world. But in practice, many countries in the global south have experienced them very differently. For them, they often did not feel like neutral guardians. They felt like instruments through which powerful Western countries could impose economic and political rules on nations that had recently escaped colonial rule. This is the central argument. Modern global institutions did not replace empire completely. In many cases, they reorganized empire into a new form. Instead of direct colonial governors, there were loan conditions. Instead of gunboats, debt negotiations. Instead of trade monopolies, intellectual property rules. The language changed. The structure of power often remained. After World War II, the old European empires began to collapse. Across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, newly independent countries wanted freedom. But independence created a new question. Could these countries truly control their own future? They had flags, but many remained dependent on Western banks. The IMF and World Bank were created at Bretton Woods in 1944, before most African and Asian countries were independent. The order was built by the victors. The UN Security Council gave permanent veto power to the winners of World War II, not to the civilizations representing the majority of humanity. The IMF presents itself as a crisis manager. When countries face balance of payments, crises, or debt panic, the IMF provides loans. But these loans usually come with conditions. Cut public spending, reduce subsidies, raise interest rates, and open the economy to foreign capital. For many global south countries, IMF programs felt less like assistance and more like discipline. The price of rescue was often policy surrender. Structural adjustment programs often harmed child and maternal health by weakening access to affordable healthcare and food access. The old colonial power once told colonized people what they could trade and tax. Now international lenders told governments what they could spend. The World Bank is often described as a development institution. It funds infrastructure, education, and health. But in the 80s and 90s, it worked with the IMF to reshape economies. Development became linked to privatization and deregulation. This created a double standard. Western countries developed using state power and subsidies, then told poorer countries to remove them and trust the market. Critics argue the World Bank promoted a model that made poorer countries more dependent on global capital and more vulnerable to outside pressure. The World Trade Organization was created in 1995 to regulate global trade. Its promise was fairness, the same rules for everyone. But rules don't affect all equally. For example, Western countries preach free trade while giving their own farmers huge subsidies that poorer farmers can't match. The message was, open your markets, but don't expect the rich countries to stop protecting their own. This is managed globalization, not neutral trade. Another controversy was intellectual property. The TRIPS agreement required minimum standards for protecting patents and copyrights. During the HIV/AIDS crisis in South Africa, patent rules made medicines expensive. Pharmaceutical companies even took the government to court. The backlash was global. Eventually, the Doha Declaration affirmed that trade rules should support public health and access to medicines. The lesson was clear. Global rules were often written around Western property rather than human need. It wasn't an accident, it was a revelation. The United Nations is universal, but its most powerful body, the Security Council, is not democratic. 5 permanent members have veto power. None of Africa or Latin America has a permanent seat. This creates a hierarchy inside the very institution that claims to defend sovereign equality. Libya in 2011 is a key example. A civilian protection mandate was used for regime change, confirming fears that humanitarian language could be a doorway to intervention. The UN provided legitimacy, but the consequences were paid by the target society. Libya fragmented into insecurity and militia rule. When we look at these institutions together, a pattern appears. They discipline policies, shape development, and protect property rules. The Global South may participate and vote, but participation is not the same as power. A country can have a seat at the table and still be unable to shape the menu. This is why some call it neocolonial. Domination became less visible. It moved from governors to economists, from colonies to conditionality. Global institutions are not meaningless. They can prevent conflict, but we should not romanticize them. They still reflect unequal power. They often speak the language of cooperation, but we must ask whose rules, whose development, and who pays the price. The struggle today is for a new international order, one where institutions are not tools of domination, but instruments of genuine equality and justice. If you found this video helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Join us in the next video as we continue exploring how empire changed form in the modern era.